Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to give it a few minutes or a couple seconds while people join. Alrighty, welcome to the E.H.Zero series again. Today we're going to be talking about how the city makes decisions. My name is Kayla Musil. I'm the program manager with the Grand Rapids 2030 district, one of the partners in the E.H.Zero initiative, along with the City of Grand Rapids and the Urban Core Collective. Today, we're excited to have Alison back with us to talk about how the city makes decisions through the lens of the Office of Sustainability and Performance Management. Just as a quick reminder, E.H.Zero is short for the Grand Rapids Programs and Policies for Equitable, Healthy, Zero Carbon Buildings. Just a housekeeping note as well, there's a chat feature at the bottom and a Q&A feature as well. Go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know what organization you're coming from. We'd love to know who's here. Also, try to keep your questions to the Q&A just so it keeps us a little bit more organized. I think that Alison has a couple sections where we can pause for questions. So then it'll be pretty organized when we get to that part. Like I mentioned, the partners in this work are the City of Grand Rapids, the Grand Rapids 2030 District, Urban Core Collective, and the Waske Foundation as our primary funder. A big thank you to our visionary supporters of the Grand Rapids 2030 District, DTE, Consumers Energy, Eagle, and the Waske Foundation. So here's the loose agenda for us today. I think we'll have about 15-20 minutes, however long we need for Q&A. So I will let Alison share her screen and get started.
Good morning. Thank you, Kayla. Before I get started, I was just peeking at the participants list. So it's nice to see some familiar faces that are participating this morning. So thanks for seeing everyone there. Just wanted to reiterate my appreciation for the partnership with the Grand Rapids 2030 District and the Urban Core Collective with respect to our E.H.Zero partnership and work, and also really wanted to highlight two members on my team, Jen Spiller, who is our Healthy and Sustainable Buildings Policy Specialist. She's the main lead for E.H.Zero work at the city, and then Annabelle Wilkinson is our Environmental and Climate Justice Specialist and is heading up our climate planning work. I will share these slides with you so that everybody has available the slides with some links and resources that I have. I am going to move fairly quickly through the slides because there's some dense content, but I want to be sure to leave enough time for questions and answers. And as Kayla said, there are two areas where I will pause intentionally for dialogue and for questions and answers. So please do feel free to continue to put some questions in the Q&A area of the Zoom, as Kayla mentioned. So with that, I'm going to go ahead now and bring up my slides that I have, and Kayla or somebody can yell at me or wave me down if it's not working correctly. But you know, I think a lot of people in the work that I've been doing, I've been with the city now for 5 years. I had no experience with city government before that. And a lot of this information was new to me, and wanted to share it with folks in the sustainability and climate change spaces to really understand how the city goes about making decisions, so that you have some insight into that process, and then understand how that impacts our sustainability and our climate change decisions that are made at the city. So I did just want to start, and this is something through our C4 work and other work that we do. So just wanted to take a moment here for a land acknowledgement, and really to recognize that we are on the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe people, and something that we're doing to really at the city lead with equity and recognize the importance of our Indigenous nations and First People that were here in the Grand Rapids area. So quick overview, going to spend some time just kind of talking about City Government 101. We'll have some time for questions and answers when I finish up that component. Then going to move more into just high level, very fast overview of some of our environmental sustainability efforts and how we've transitioned into more of a focus on environmental and climate justice. why we're doing that focus and what it is that we're currently working on. And I know some of you have probably seen a little bit of this information in different places before, hence another reason why I'll move relatively quickly. And for those of you, if you haven't seen the information before and you want some clarification or questions, please feel free to bring that up and we can revisit that as part of our discussion. So jumping into this first component, kind of city government 101, this is something we've recognized at the city that I don't think it's unique to the city of Grand Rapids, but there is a growing number of people who don't seem to have the education or the information that's being received in an accessible way to understand how local city government operates. And so this is something we're taking on broadly as a city initiative in terms of kind of standing this up over the next year. But in the short term, I wanted to just kind of provide a little bit of background. So if you're not familiar, right, the city is run based off of a charter that we have, that it was established, and that really identifies the core essential services that we provide as a city, right? So a big one is, of course, public safety. We do a number of public services such as water supply, sewage disposal, and a lot with refuse and street repair, maintenance, and sidewalks. We, of course, facilitate city elections and our city governance. And then by law, we are required to, every 20 years, have an updated community master plan process that is done as well. So won't get into the detail here. I have a link to share with you, but it's important to know and to understand, I think, particularly in the climate change space, some differences in terms of the type of revenue sources that we have. In enterprise funds, what's important is we have some departments that charge for their services, right? So our water department, our sewer department, parking charges for services, refuse in terms of our trash collection. And so when they charge for those services, they receive revenue. But the way that city government is established is that revenue has to be used for those departments. So that means that revenue that's being collected from the water department, for instance, can't be something that is given to or used in the Office of Sustainability if it is not directly connected to the water service that is being provided. So we are an income tax based city, which is a little different than many other cities. Often most cities are property tax based, where the primary funding that they receive is from property taxes, but we're different in that it's income tax. So it is a tax for those that live in the city of Grand Rapids or work in the city of Grand Rapids. And this is one of the reasons why actually COVID hit us a little bit harder, because as people were kind of working from outside of the city more, that had some impacts. And then of course we have a lot of different types of grants, and that's been something a little bit bigger with all of the federal, state, and ARPA funding that's been coming through. So in terms of our expenses and how and where do we get to spend the money, again, those enterprise funds that I mentioned, you can see they make up a pretty large amount of the budget that we spend. And again, that has to be directly revenue that comes into that department, can support the expenses of that department. And then there's what's called the general operating fund, or sometimes general fund. That is where property taxes and income taxes come in, and that's where we support public safety, general government, which includes sustainability work as well. And some others. And then in addition, we've been successful due to the wonderful support of some philanthropy in terms of having some additional grant support for our sustainability and climate change work. This is just a link, and these two are links here for English and Spanish. So if you want a little bit more information on some of this, it's a nice, very short, only about 8-page, I think, with a lot of graphs and overview that really helps explain the city's finances and budgeting and where the money is spent. So in terms of kind of responsibilities, there are different types of city governments that exist. And in Grand Rapids, we're what's considered a council manager form of government. And that's where we refer to our council as a commission and our city commission. But that city commission is responsible for policy. And then they appoint or hire and appoint a city manager who serves as the CEO of all city operations. And so and city manager Washington was hired in the end of 2018 from Austin, Texas. And he has been really disciplined and worked to set in place a structure to really keep the policy discussions with the commission and to keep operational programs and work with staff and under his purview. So you can see a little bit more information about our commission here. They are elected to 2 terms. They are 4 terms apiece. And you can see some of the things here, but right, the city commission does approve or reject the budget. They ultimately will approve the community master plan and ordinances and resolutions, but they do not have authority over the city's strategic plan, which I will talk a little bit more about. That is very much an operational plan that's in the purview of the city manager. He also has the authority to make staffing decisions as well as determining what types of programs should be funded, where we're going to focus, and works in partnership with the commission to identify priorities for the city. And we do have, outside of the city manager, the commission appoints 3 other staff, which is the treasurer, the attorney, and the clerk. So I know this is a little small, but just to help orient you, right? So residents of Grand Rapids, this is our city commission. So we do work, our city comptroller is an elected position as well. We work very closely with the library and with our district court. And so those are kind of considered within the city family, but not something that the city manager directly oversees the operations of. And so this is city manager. And as I mentioned, the commission appoints the treasurer, the clerk, and the attorney. So they have their respective departments. And then the city manager here oversees, and you can see the direct reports in terms of, it's mostly public safety on this side, but then we have a deputy city manager, Kate Behrens. Those of you who may have worked in the past with Eric DeLong, he formerly was there before he retired. And I report up, you'll see, through assistant city manager, Doug Matthews. And then we have our CFO as well. And so here's where I fit. This is, as I mentioned, the assistant city manager, Doug Matthews, and these are the departments that he oversees. And so sustainability and performance management is housed there. And something that's a little bit new is actually public services, which are our water, wastewater, as well as our refuse and streets programs, recently transitioned to be reporting up to ACM Matthews. It previously was under the deputy city manager, but this is nice because it gives us more of an opportunity to collaborate on sustainability and climate change work. So what is it that we can and can't do? There is an act called the Michigan Home Rule City Act, and that's what allows the city government to exercise the powers that we have, and also informs us of uncertain processes that have to be followed. And there's something, some of you might be familiar with preemption, but this is when a higher level of government, could be the state or the federal, or I think perhaps even the county, and they can use that to overrule the authority of a lower level government. We have our city code of ordinance, which is basically the laws of the city of Grand Rapids, and they have to be followed unless there's a policy change. So this includes our city charter, which has quite an involved process if amendments were to be requested and made to the charter. But then there are kind of these 10 substantive sections that you can see listed here: parks and public grounds and zoning and planning, and some that are really used a lot more than others. But those are kind of the main other areas of our ordinance that establishes the law. And so, as I mentioned, we do have close partnerships with the library, the district court, and the Grand Rapids Housing Commission. There's also a convention arena authority, and they are part of the city family, but they do have their own boards and their own budgets. So still kind of sticking with, what is it that city government can do? And then we'll, providing this information so we can all be aware of, to the extent that the city has authority to do things within the climate change and sustainability areas. But we do have a number of state laws that preempt the city of Grand Rapids and other Michigan municipalities from taking action on something. So just a couple of examples here. The state of Michigan actually establishes building and energy codes, and they currently at this time prohibit local municipalities from being any more progressive or having any stricter requirements than what the state establishes. So when the state says new buildings or major renovations need to have, a HVAC system that operates at X efficiency, the city of Grand Rapids can't come in and say, well, we really want you to operate more efficiently because we understand the climate change implications. And so instead of, to be honest, I don't know the exact code provision, but instead of 90% efficiency, the city can't say, well, we really want you to do 97% efficiency. Similarly, we can't come in and require more building insulation. We can't require 100% electrification, because those are things that would be seen in opposition to the state's building and energy code. There's also rent control and prohibitions on rent control at the state level. So a lot of the work that we're doing around affordable housing and try to work in that area, some people will say, well, why can't you just force rent to be kept at a minimum level to help preserve affordable housing, but that is not an option that's available to Michigan municipalities. And then the state of Michigan, through legislation, also passed a law that prohibits local municipalities from enacting any kind of plastic bag bans. So those are just a couple of examples that are clearly outside the authority of the city of Grand Rapids due to the state and other higher level governments. So the Michigan Public Service Commission, if you're not familiar with them, they are a state regulatory agency similar to EGLE. And they regulate energy utilities, right? So we also do not have the ability to tell our utilities that you have to provide renewable energy. We cannot tell them or implicate how much they give back for distributed generation when you create excess electricity that goes back to the utility and things of that nature. With respect to Kent County, they're a very close partner, of course. They have full authority over the health department, the waste to energy facility, and the recycling and education center. And so we of course, through our services, collect recycling from our residents, and we collect trash from our residents and businesses that goes to the waste to energy facility. So we are kind of the collection and the transport partner, but ultimately the operation of those facilities is within the control of the county. And then just, these were things I didn't know before I came to the city, right? But places like Grand Rapids Public Schools, that is wholly outside of the city of government, completely separate. So is our public transit, the Rapid, other places that you might hear of, and other kind of quasi-governmental or regional governmental organizations that I've listed here. So those are not under the control of the city manager or our budget. So strategic plan, city manager Washington is very adamant, and he really drives what we do at the city through what is in our strategic plan. It's not a plan that sits on the shelf. He uses it. It's how he holds himself accountable to what we're achieving as a city, as well as his departments. And so if there's something that a department is looking to ask for and request funding for, he'll say, how does that align to the desired outcomes in our strategic plan? We are in the process of doing an update that should be announced publicly by hopefully the end of this calendar year. So in that plan, I won't go into it, but I encourage you really to check out our values specifically. We're a very values-led organization, and that means that sustainability and equity are expected to be woven into all of the decisions that are made at the city, just like our other values. And that is something that we have a lot of conversations about. And again, there's an expectation with departments. So even if they don't see themselves as directly working in kind of the environmental sustainability or climate change space, they should be thinking about how their actions are going to have impacts on those areas, just as they need to be thinking about the financial sustainability as well as impacts to our community and to individuals and people. The way that our plan is set up, we have 6 priorities. And so the one where the bulk of my work is focused is under health and environment and the team. And here, so we have the health of all people in the environment are advocated for, protected, and enhanced. We do a lot of close work with our mobility partners as well, in terms of understanding the big impacts of mobility around climate change. I want to take a minute. We do also have an equity statement that is at the very beginning of our strategic plan, because equity is something that we take very, very seriously. And so just a couple sections that I've pulled out within the equity statement to really highlight is that, we talk about and have prioritized equity, but specifically kind of, and I would say we're not really early in our journey anymore. We're one of the first cities, I think, to truly start on an equity journey. But we're very focused on racial equity. That doesn't mean that we're not focusing on other types of discrimination or populations that are experiencing disparate outcomes. But we are very explicit that we are using a targeted universalism approach and that we are focused on racial equity first. We also in our statement recognize and acknowledge that the city government itself is one of the causes of institutional and structural racism. We are a part of that process, and we are doing what we can within our own control and our ability to influence others to really remove those barriers that have been put in place and to dismantle those systems that exist and ensure as we move forward that we have policies that are equitable in nature. But we also realize that this is work that we cannot do just within city government operations and city hall walls. And so we know that we really need to be working very closely with partners and allies across the entire community so that we can really help make Grand Rapids be truly the best place for everyone in our community to live. So in terms of the decision-making process, as I mentioned, the city manager starts with the strategic plan. So what is in the strategic plan? And every year now in the timeframe of September, we do an annual performance report to look back at the previous year and say, well, how did we perform on what we said we were going to do? And what did we achieve? And so we just gave that report publicly in September. So then what comes next is in November, which is on November 10th this year, we host what is called a City Commission Prioritization Workshop. And I should just pause for a minute. If you're not aware, I wear two hats at the city. I oversee our sustainability office, but I also was appointed to oversee performance management, which is the creation of the citywide strategic plan and the implementation of that plan. So I am very heavily involved in all of the items that have to do with the city plan and helping to facilitate and host the City Commission Prioritization Workshop. So if you see me in that role, I just wanted you to understand that I have the two different hats that I wear. But at this prioritization workshop is when the commission, as our policy leaders, have the opportunity to provide feedback to the city manager directly about what they're hearing from their constituents and what they believe should be the highest policy priorities for the city of Grand Rapids. And the city manager takes that information into consideration and works with all of his departments and staff to really then set up what will become the budget process for the city. And most of our departments have their budgets, and our capital budgets are due kind of early to mid-January. So the intention is we've been informed by the policy leaders, and the city manager has given direction with departments to understand what the priorities will be for the next year, and that's taken into consideration when each of us as department heads create our budgets. And so we submit those budgets. We do a mid-year performance report in February with respect to our current fiscal year that we're operating in. And then the city manager presents what's considered the preliminary fiscal plan, or you could think of it as the draft budget, to the city commission at the end of April every year. We go through some workshops with the commission and answer questions, and he facilitates getting some final feedback and working through what that budget will be in partnership with our CFO. And then the city commission is asked to vote on that budget in late May. And our fiscal year runs from July 1st through June 30th. And so that budget then is in place in late May and directs our spending and operations for the next year. I did put a link here. We do a lot of performance management reports and have tried to make all of these reports available to the public, both in terms of when we go through the public process or the public budget, the budgeting process, as well as our performance reports. So you can find that information and videos at that link. So to wrap up, I think here, this just reiterates a little bit more information, but I just wanted to make sure everybody is aware. We have the Commission Prioritization Workshop. This was from our September presentation that's coming up, and you can view this through our YouTube channel or through Facebook, as you can our other commission meetings. And then around February, like I said, will be mid-year, and April is when the city manager presents budget. So the commission, from past years' commission prioritization workshops, identified these 6 focus areas as their highest priorities. Now, this started, of course, when we were in COVID. And so it was very streamlined and focused, knowing that we were going through and experiencing COVID. And they put these focus areas in place and highlighted them for what the fiscal year we just ended in June of 2022, but then also remaining priorities for our current fiscal year, which is considered fiscal year 23, because we started July 1 of 2022 and it'll go through June of 2023. So you can see here housing and homelessness, COVID relief and economic recovery, participatory budgeting, public safety reform, crime prevention and violence reduction, and fiscal sustainability. So those were the 6 key focus areas that we've really been focused on for pretty much the last 2 years. And then starting about a year ago, probably at the prioritization workshop last year, there were some other identified focus areas that continue to rise to the top. And you can see here that climate change is one of those. And so this past February, the commission acknowledged and approved that these are key focus areas as well. In addition to the 6 existing, these additional 5 are focus areas for our current fiscal year that we're currently in. And there are a number of ways in which we really try to advocate for citizens, residents, businesses, folks that do work in the city to have the opportunity to provide feedback at a number of different avenues. So our commission meetings, in terms of you can participate in those and give public testimony in terms of communication directly with staff. We very much ask people, we have a lot of boards and commissions, so if you're interested in getting more involved, I've provided there as a few examples, and this link will take you to our full list. We, of course, if you're not familiar, we are working on our next 20-year community master plan process that has kicked off, and there will be a lot of engagement opportunities, probably starting at the beginning of calendar year 2023, and our budget process. So with that, I am going to, for a moment here, stop sharing and see what questions or email you have or comments. And so I see there's one question. I'm not sure if it's already been answered, but the slides, yes, those will be shared. And then the question that we have is that the city cannot require more progressive building or energy codes than what's established by the state. Other cities have adopted stretch codes. Is that something GR could do? And if so, what might that look like? So kind of 2 responses specifically to that question. So one, I believe that as the state is in the final process of finalizing the most recent building code, as part of what came down from the international level was the option for states to approve or reject kind of an appendix that would allow local municipalities to have stretch codes. And so that is something that we're still kind of waiting on, and we have been advocating that the state include the ability for local municipalities to pursue stretch codes if they would like. Outside of the stretch codes, even if the state did not include that as a part of what they ultimately approve, one other avenue that we can kind of work on that would be through economic development incentives, right? So we wouldn't be able to make it a requirement for projects, but we could, for any projects that are seeking economic development incentives from the city, we could take components of kind of that stretch code and apply those as requirements or ways in which they could earn points to then ultimately earn economic development incentives. Mindy, thanks for your question. So greenhouse gas inventory, we are in the final processes. I had hoped to have it actually finalized by today, but it's being completed, a community-wide greenhouse gas emissions inventory based on 2019 data that we should have available. I'm hoping in the next few weeks that will be finalized, and we'll be pushing out and doing some promotion, sharing with partners broadly, and probably coming back and doing some more webinars to go over the details and the findings of that specific inventory. And as a component of that, we're working with Equitable, which is a national nonprofit that does inventories on behalf of cities and communities. They will also be establishing science-based targets for our community as well in that document. All right, so I'm asked what's being done at the state level to allow Grand Rapids to continue leadership in the sustainability space? Any advocacy efforts that people can get involved in? So thank you. That's an amazing question. I very much appreciate it. I'll be honest. I think there's probably, I would say, 4 ways that I'm thinking about in terms of engaging at the state level. The first is really kind of the traditional legislative process in terms of any time that a bill is introduced. So we've had bills to lift the solar cap, or there have been bills to allow private development of community solar. And those are state legislative bills. And so you can always engage at the state level to try to influence and perhaps support the passage of some of that legislation. And we do engage at that front. Right now, I think we're kind of in a standstill with the elections to see what will happen. But historically, a number of the bills that I have recommended that the city support around kind of some of the energy components are not things that have been supported at the state level with the majority Republican Senate and Congress that we have right now. But the second way, we do have, kind of relationships and work that we do with the governor's office directly. She, of course, is very supportive of climate change, and so that's been helpful. Through EGLE, they have their, Council on Climate Solutions, with which anybody can attend their meetings and provide input, and we've been participating in those and really kind of saying, okay, well, with your My Healthy Climate Plan, like, this is how the city of Grand Rapids has experienced movement in some of these areas, and trying to see what the state could do from a state regulatory level or even legislative level to kind of open up more doors for us at the state level. And I also serve on the Michigan Advisory Council for Environmental Justice. And so that's an area where I meet with regularly the environmental justice public advocate, Regina Strong, at the state level. And then the last place, though, where I actually think there's a lot more opportunity is with the Michigan Public Service Commission. And it was really hard to get involved in that because it's very technical and it's very based on energy. And it's like you almost need to be a full-time energy engineer or attorney to be involved in that space. But I've really been, the city, sometimes we intervene in cases or we just participate in the, they just had an open call for feedback on what should be included and required when utilities do long range planning, right? Like 15-year planning. And so I was putting in comments saying you should be thinking about climate change and they need to be projecting what changes are going to happen because of climate change, or thinking about the electrification of buildings and how that is going to be something that's coming. And so how are they planning for that? And so I think that there are some really good ways to get involved with the Michigan Public Service Commission that would really help, because again, they are the ones that regulate the utility industry. But from all things of, I was even saying, line up with with Justice 40 from the federal level and require energy waste reduction programs be focused in vulnerable communities and environmental justice communities. And that's something that I think the Michigan Public Service Commission can push down to the utilities to have them looking at that. All right, okay. What 2030 district new construction in an existing building mandates have been established for the city? So as of right now, the 2030 district is completely voluntary. So there's nothing that is mandated through the 2030 district. The one place where the city, we've kind of dipped our toe into this work and started was, it's probably been at least 2 years now, I think. But when the cannabis industry was coming online in the city of Grand Rapids, we worked with our partner departments in the licensing ordinance for cannabis operations, both retail and grow facilities, to establish some requirements for those facilities. And one of them was that they need to participate in the 2030 district. So this is the first time we've had a mandate to force people to participate in the 2030 district, just knowing how energy intensive they are, to be sure that that's being tracked. So we have an understanding of the emissions growth due to that industry. And then particularly for the grow industries, we also had some additional requirements in terms of lighting efficiency that needed to be achieved, a 50% lighting efficiency. Also had to look at and submit a kind of a sustainability plan where they spoke to their energy emissions, water, waste, and the plans that they were doing and how they were addressing those areas. And then ultimately, it does also require an ASHRAE level 2 audit be completed after they've been in operation for some time to provide some additional information. So right now, those are the primary ways that we have kind of worked with the 2030 district outside of it being voluntary. But I will say, as a part of kind of this E.H.Zero initiative that we have going on, we're in the process right now of really exploring what other options does the city have to either require or incentivize or set up programs to help support buildings achieving these deep, carbon emissions reductions and better supporting renewable energy. I'm going to quick check. I don't see anything else in the chat. So that was the last question that I saw there. So thank you for the questions, and please keep them coming. I will go ahead at this time and move on to our next section, which overlaps a little with some of the things that have been shared here. but we'll get into a little bit more detail into some of those. And then of course, there'll be more time for questions and discussion at that time. So let me bring back my screen up here. Okay. I suspect a lot of you are pretty familiar with what's been going on at the city, but I don't want to make the assumption that everybody knows holistically. So I will move through this quickly just to provide a little bit of an overview. And again, the slides are going to be shared with you, so I'm not going to go through every point that's on these slides. But you know, I'm very proud of, and I think a lot of people in the community are very proud of the fact that the city of Grand Rapids, right? And when I say city, I mean our governmental entity. When I refer broadly to the city of Grand Rapids as a community with employers and residents and everybody else, I use the term community. And so the city of Grand Rapids governmental institution really got started on our environmental sustainability journey in 2005 when Mayor Hartwell was elected. And that really started initially with a bold goal around 20% renewable energy for our own municipal operations. But I do also want to note that at that time, and I want to be very clear and acknowledge this, the city government did not catalyze or start environmental sustainability in our greater Grand Rapids community. It was really an amazing partnership between the business community, the academic community, as well as city government that were coming together. Some of you might be familiar with the former Community Sustainability Partnership that I think really ignited sustainability more broadly across our community. And that is something that I think has just been a wonderful partnership that has really helped our community move faster and be a leader in this area. So you can see a number of different accomplishments, kind of more historical accomplishments. If you're not familiar, we did ultimately achieve that 20% renewable energy in about 2007. And so then the goal was established for 100% renewable energy. Mayor Bliss was elected and came on board in 2016 and still continues to serve. And so she actually was a city commissioner when former Mayor Hartwell was the mayor. And so she has been very active and involved throughout the entire journey of the city of Grand Rapids and sustainability and has been very supportive. She actually at that time brought on really our focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion and more of the social component. She's a social worker is her background. And so she has that passion and has brought that to the city. 2017 was when I was hired, and there, you know, a number of people know Horace and others. So he did sustainability work, but it actually wasn't his full-time job. And so this is really the first time that the city had a full-time dedicated position for sustainability. I mentioned 2019 is when our strategic plan came out. 2021, I have a colleague, Karen Farrick, and she oversees our legislative priority agenda, and that's established. And that was really great because it includes increasing climate resiliency and reducing carbon emissions and supporting renewable energy. So that's a lot of work that we do with partners in the community and advocacy that we do primarily at the state level. And so I also want to just shout out again. So 2021 was when I had the opportunity to bring on my 2 full-time staff members. So Annabelle Wilkinson, who is the environmental and climate justice specialist, has come on and through grant funding, but we're looking to make it a long-term sustainable position. I was able to also add Jen Spiller to our team. So we are a mighty team of 3, and we've had some amazing fellows and interns over the years, but Jen is serving as our sustainable buildings policy, or excuse me, healthy and sustainable buildings policy specialist. And so it was a year ago that City Manager Washington announced on behalf of our municipal operations, our emissions reductions goals. So we do have what I believe to be a best in class goal of 85% reduction by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2040. You might be familiar as very much of a policy decision. Our city commission passed a resolution declaring climate change a crisis this time last year. And you can see a few other things. We did successfully get nearly a 1 megawatt solar array up and is actively generating 10% of, at least 10% of our water filtration plant's electricity. And then just more recently here through E.H.Zero, I know this series has been doing a great job of keeping everybody up to date. We have are working with and solidified Green Star, which is a partnership between Building Bridges, Green Home Institute, Elevate Energy, and Seeds of Promise. That's working with our E.H.Zero team on our housing renovation pilot. And we were just notified, so it hasn't worked through and isn't completely finalized, but I think that we should be getting about $125,000 in grant funding to move forward with the renovation of 5 homes in the community. And there'll be some more information coming out about that too. So this is just showing our baseline, and this is for municipal operations, but by 2020, we had reduced by 30% in comparison to our baseline, which already exceeds the Paris Climate Agreement. This graph, it's a little busy, but starting on the left, moving down is actually by the blue bar, which is more around performance of carbon emissions reduction. So this is showing we have a 30% reduction. At the time that this graph was created, we actually hadn't finalized our goal yet. And unfortunately, I didn't have time to get it updated for today. But we're the 5th best performer based on publicly available data when we did research in terms of performance for how many emissions we've actually reduced. And with our 85% goal by 2030, we actually have the 4th most aggressive goal with a few others. And, really want to shout out and congratulate Ann Arbor. They of course have their goal of carbon neutrality by 2030, and Austin and Orlando, 2 communities of which have their own municipal utility, which really helps move faster on those goals. And then specifically at Renewable Energy, we're currently, well, again, this might be a year, 2 years dated now, but we were the 3rd best performer in terms of the amount of renewable energy that's actually supplying our municipal operations, which there's a lot to be said, because cities with their own municipal utility, of course, can move and make decisions much more quickly than when we are in a place with investor-owned utilities. So we've looked at our own inventory, and a lot of our emissions was coming from electricity. I do want to note something I learned recently, but when we did this inventory of our own municipal operations, we were not including line losses or leakage from natural gas, which is now, as I've learned through our community-wide emissions inventory, is something that is being included. And so I suspect that our natural gas numbers would grow, and that this number actually probably would grow quite a bit with the inclusion of those methane leaks and line losses from natural gas. But at the time, it was still showing that our predominant emissions were being generated from electricity, but you can see we're including transportation. Just a reminder, this is our fleet. We don't operate the Rapid. And so then you can look at it by department. So our water system and ESD is Environmental Services Department. That's what does our biodigester and our wharf. I mean, those 2 together 2 water utilities together account for 50% of our emissions. And if you think about the way in which I think communities and organizations that are doing emissions inventories, right, when you think about the electricity or the natural gas that's being consumed on site by your property, that's attributed to you or your business. But right now, the city of Grand Rapids is actually wholly taking into account and considering all of the energy being used to produce the water and the sewer services that you all use. We've incorporated in that, and that's currently being shown within our emissions footprint and not something that has been pushed out to others. So I just want to note that that's a different way, and it's a very large component of our emissions inventory. So we have street lighting, transportation, and our other buildings. And so this just kind of shows over time, this is when our biodigester came online. And so our natural gas consumption has, kind of significantly decreased down with some changes with the biodigester over time. 2025 is when we have our 100% renewable energy goal. In 2030 is when we were looking at to understand measurement. And of course, that 85% reduction goal. And you can see some of the assumptions here. This modeling goes out to 2050. 2040 is when consumers has created their own voluntary goal and commitment to be at 0 carbon with respect to the electricity that they're supplying, and DTE in 2050. So those have been accounted for in this modeling as we move out into the future as well. So what this looks like for us in terms of our modeling by 2025, with projects that we already have in the works and that have been funded, such as the biodigester, street lighting conversion to LEDs, and our recent solar, we've projected that we'll be at a 47% emissions reduction versus our baseline by 2025, and that by 2030, we could get down to a 59% reduction. But really the big key factor is if we're able to achieve our 100% renewable energy goal, then that'll get us to an 84% emissions reduction, because we will still need to account, of course, for our natural gas consumption. And this does include a little bit of conversion with respect to electric vehicles and transportation, but we'll have more to address with respect to that. So that's kind of the history and the focus there. I won't go through all of these, but I think terms and how we define things are really important. And I think predominantly through about 2017, 18, when I first came on, when the city talks about sustainability work, we were predominantly doing environmental sustainability or environmental conservation work. And then, of course, hopefully most of you are pretty familiar with climate change and the differences between mitigation, decarbonization, and adaptation. I will say we've been doing adaptation for quite a long time as well, with respect to knowing that we have flood risks in our community and our stormwater programs, and quite frankly, the separation of our combined sewer overflow, which has been fully separated, and communities don't have that. That prevents untreated sewage from going into the Grand River when we have major precipitation events, and that is something that is still plaguing many cities across the country. So for us, as I mentioned, I think we really started with a focus on environmental sustainability. And then after I came to the city, was super excited because we had very much a focus and we were leading on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so for me, this has helped transform the focus of my office and the work that we do to be centered on environmental justice. And so these are, thinking about environmental justice and climate justice. This environmental justice definition is a national definition that has been used and looked at in terms of, and a lot of times environmental justice issues will have to do with lead-based paint in your house and some things that I don't think, access to water, potable water. And we saw a lot of those things happening during COVID. Across the state in terms of having access to those. So those are some things that I would say are very squarely within environmental justice, but don't necessarily fall under climate justice. But there's a lot of overlap between those two. And here you can see that it's really talking about it being more about a movement that addresses the ethical dimensions of climate change. And as I mentioned, Annabelle Wilkinson is really the lead for us on this work. So just want to acknowledge her work in putting this together. And then a lot of focus as well as on just transition in terms of shifting away from an extractive economy to one that's regenerative, and really thinking about the people who might be employed in certain industries and jobs. And, if everybody wants to get rid of coal-fired power plants, well, how are we making sure that everybody has access to good paying jobs in their communities, as well as understanding that, quite frankly, those communities are really based on that tax base. And so when you remove that tax base from your community, what does that do to that community? So this has kind of been the transition that I share with people that over my 5 years, I came in the beginning was very focused on environmental conservation, and now we've moved more toward climate change and environmental justice. The early years very focused on our own municipal operations because we want to lead by example. And now we're starting to transition to be a little bit more focused on the community, and originally very focused on climate mitigation and carbon reduction, but continuing and really thinking more about climate resilience holistically in terms of the work that we do. So I won't go, this is our beautiful solar array at our Lake Michigan filtration plant. This just reiterates a number of things. This is from one of our performance reports. So the type of information that we report out to leadership and to our city commission for the types of accomplishments that have been achieved. So this is what was done in September with respect to our performance report as kind of a look back with respect to carbon reduction and climate resiliency and some of the things that had been accomplished over the previous year. And we are also tracking a number of metrics. So we are tracking our own municipal greenhouse gas emissions reduction. As I mentioned, we're at 30% with that goal of 85%, as well as our renewable energy performance. So we're at 37.5%. We're doing some measurement with the filtration plant solar just coming online, but are hoping to see that we'll get up around the 41% after we take renewable energy, after we take that solar installation into consideration. And you can see some of the other water, waste, and health metrics that we're also tracking as a part of our health and environment priority area. Okay, so that was kind of that quick overview. And now this is the last component before we'll break into some more questions and discussion. So why is it that at the city of Grand Rapids that we're leading with climate change and environmental justice, and what is it that we're exactly doing now? So if you're not familiar with the science, this is actually a link to a new report. Annabelle's been working very closely with GLISA to come up with a report. It's a really nice report specific to Grand Rapids, but also provides the Great Lakes region information on very specific predicted climate changes to come to our region. And it also documents the climate changes that we have experienced to date. And so really the biggest things that come up are, right, that the average air temperature has been increasing and will continue to increase. But what's important to know is that that increase is going to happen mostly in the winter. So we'll have warmer winters. In terms of, they're actually showing a little bit of decrease in summer temperature. In terms of annual precipitation, that will continue to increase. And again, that's something that we're seeing more in the spring, which unfortunately leads to more flooding in our community. And so how are we preparing in our building systems and structures, as well as our community systems, our transportation systems, to know that this is going to be something that is going to happen more in the future? And we're going to experience more extreme weather events at one time. So it's kind of, now we're having a lot of precipitation come down at one time, which could be either snow or rain. And then we're going to go for quite a period of time, almost in a drought condition, and not have precipitation, and then have another big kind of deluge of rain or of snow, and more lake effect snow. So it'll come, and when it comes, it's going to come heavy, but it might not come quite as often. And then the last part is, we also know that we're going to have more, although the average temperature is looking to decrease just a little bit in the summer, we're actually going to have more extreme heat events, where we have longer numbers of days with really high temperatures as well as high humidity. And that's very dangerous for vulnerable communities. A lot of our homes don't have air conditioning in them. I know that some older retirement communities don't have air conditioning in them. And so this becomes a significant concern. So what does all of that mean? Since now we know the science and we know what's coming, in terms of, want to give credit to Erin Ferguson from the state Health and Human Services Department, and working and putting this together. So this is from the state's perspective in terms of priority climate related health impacts. And with that increase in temperature, unfortunately, we're going to continue to see more what are considered vector-borne diseases. So that's ticks and mosquitoes and the diseases that they carry with them. I talked about heat illness. Actually, if you don't know, heat illness is the #1 extreme weather event killer of all extreme weather events across the United States. And this really does have a significant impact on physical and mental health, particularly if you're in a vulnerable community where you're now experiencing these types of events on a more regular basis. And maybe you just, have recovered from one flood, and now there's another flood event or another power outage, and you lose everything that you had in your freezer and your food and all of that. And that really starts to become a significant mental health impact as well. From an economic perspective, right? Not just health and people, but this is a significant economic disruption as well. There's a lot going on in this graph. It's from NOAA, but this is specific to Michigan. And it talks about the billion-dollar disaster events that we've had over the last couple of decades. So you can see generally the increase. The green bars, which you see the most of, are severe storms, which lead to power outages. And you can see some purple are winter storm counts. The darker blue is flooding. And then kind of this like mustard yellow color, I guess, if you will, is actually considered I got to go back and confirm. Now I don't want to say it incorrectly. I thought it was drought, but I will confirm that. And you can see, though, just how expensive this has been, and that in 2021, there were $5 billion disaster events in the state of Michigan. So this is becoming, it's extremely costly. So 3 things that I just want to note, but there are links to these reports to get more information specific to the city of Grand Rapids. Really want to acknowledge that Link Up locally, they worked with Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice to come out with this report, which I think was published in around 2017 or 18, but really looking at the disparities that are happening in the city of Grand Rapids based on environmental justice and pollutants, as well as climate change. The University of Michigan led a report that was published in 2019, where they looked at and analyzed all of the census tracts across the state of Michigan, and gave scores for environmental injustice. So where are the communities that have the most environmental injustice? And it was really unfortunate that the 10 top census tracts with the most injustice, 5 of them are in the city of Grand Rapids, including the first one. And so this is where they really looked at, and there's a link that I've provided here. You can get some more information, but they layered demographics such as race and ethnicity with, it was 11, I believe, environmental indicators such as proximity to brownfields, air quality, proximity to heavy truck traffic corridors, number of air permits in the vicinity of that area to really identify kind of areas with higher levels of environmental pollutant exposure. And then the US EPA also came out with recently this report that they had looking at climate change and social vulnerability, where they also are really looking at both these types of impacts on low income as well as minority residents. And that's something that we're looking at and focusing on here as well. And so this is just a nice document if you're looking to have a little bit more information about what is going on with respect to climate change and vulnerable populations and climate justice work. So want to acknowledge, we've been kind of talking about our story and our transition. We previously were in a project called the Zero Cities Project, and that's really what ignited our environmental justice and climate justice focus. And so we had some grant funding to participate in this project, and it had a dual goal of equity and decarbonization of buildings. So some of you, if you've heard our past presentations on this, are probably familiar with it. And our community-based organization, which was the Urban Core Collective that was recommended to us and selected to serve in that capacity, as our equity partner, received funding and participated with us. And they really pushed us, and they said, why are we just going to do this for 1 year and only focus on buildings? If we're going to do this work and we're really going to do it, then let's build a movement that needs to be much bigger and much broader and much more inclusive. And that was really the impetus for the community collaboration on climate change. And we worked there, and there's a report on our website that's a Grand Rapids equity assessment tool that very clearly through the data shows the significant negative disparities that are being, that our Black and Brown residents are feeling with respect to lack of tree canopy or access to green space, as well as energy burden within homes and living in substandard homes. And so this is kind of what was going on in the background as well as a part of that transition. This is just a zoom in on our strategic plan as it exists right now to really put into context where our C4, E.H.Zero, and 2030 district programs fall. And we have a strategy where we're working on our own municipal operations, but we're also trying to create and support programs and policies that'll help reduce carbon emissions in the building sector and in the transportation sector as well. So this graph I just wanted to share because we got lots of questions about goals and establishing goals and community-wide goals. And so this was put together just starting all the way from the International Paris Climate Accord, moving all the way down, of course, national, state. Kent County has not currently established any goals. For our entire community, we actually have signed on to the We Are Still In the Paris Climate Accord, which then by nature makes us subject to the Paris Climate Accord goals in some, and others will state, well, obviously the international goals are supposed to, or excuse me, the national goals should be applying to us as well. So that's kind of already an established goal just based on it being a federal goal or a state goal. But there's a lot of differences between goals and dates and timelines of establishment. And this was the one that the city has established with respect to our own municipal operations. So one other topic to go into, if you're not familiar with climate migration, that's something that I encourage you to look into and become a little more familiar with. There's a map, I keep forgetting to get it, but essentially a map of the United States that shows where predominantly the extreme weather events are happening, whether it's flooding or earthquakes or tornadoes or wildfires or all of these things that are happening. And once you kind of map all of those out across the United States, there are like 2 areas that are relatively free of events. And it's the state of Michigan and the state of Montana. And so for businesses or even people who are fleeing from areas where there's just significant disruption due to wildfires, the heat just getting so hot and unbearable, flooding, of course, the hurricanes, and particularly businesses, they're going to start to look and say, wow, Michigan looks like a really great place to go. They're not experiencing nearly as many extreme weather events, although we have them, as other communities. Got a lot of fresh water, wonderful community to live in, and great access to the outdoors and a strong economy. And so we are going to be an area that we truly believe a lot of people are going to be looking to move to, which can be an opportunity for us, right? But we have to think about how we're balancing that growth while also being mindful of protecting natural resources and the health of our community, and as well as being thoughtful about climate change and what that's going to mean for people that would be moving to the greater Grand Rapids area, region, in Michigan more broadly. So this is just wrapping up in terms of sharing. So we're in our current fiscal year 23, which started on July 1st. So if you're wondering, well, what are you working on now? You've helped us understand kind of some of the things you've done. So the E.H.Zero program still remains a very big key focus area for us that we're working on. And I'm sure there's going to be some more information coming out in the near future. I know we've been working with Sherry and Kayla on some more information to get out about where we're at in that process, and bringing some in to think in a more detailed fashion about some of the different policies and programs that we've been able to research and see how they're functioning in other areas, and evaluate to what extent they could possibly be implemented here in our community. The C4, I just want to be really clear, the city does not run or own the C4. We are a participant in the C4, there are two of us, and Annabelle is our lead there in terms of participating on that group. She also is leading and is just getting ready to kick off, and there'll be some more information coming out about our climate action and adaptation plan, which we hope to have completed in about 2 years, but there's going to be a lot of work done around having climate stories that are collected, as well as doing a social vulnerability assessment of our community, and where are there the greatest risks to climate change in our community, and who's experiencing those greater risks, and how are we thinking about that as we identify what should be the key strategies and priorities for the city to implement and invest in. She's also working a lot on, and will be coming out soon with kind of a series of climate change trainings, short trainings that we'll be giving to our staff, but we'll be making publicly available for people who want to have some of this information and kind of go into just very broadly kind of overview what is climate change and what's happening here, and what's climate justice, and what are some of the key things that we can be looking at to pursue as a city. Of course, we'll still work on reducing our own municipal operations, and we do a lot of other things around stormwater, and a lot of focus on kind of re-strategizing around our refuse collection for recycling and trash, and looking at what options we might have around organics, waste collection, and some other items there, as well as also working with our fleet and looking at electrification of our fleet, but also using renewable natural gas, which we are generating in our biodigester. And so these are some of the horizon topics that we discuss as kind of a little bit further out there, but they're on my mind and things that I'm thinking about as we're doing this work. And a big one is just, to what extent does our community really understand climate change and environmental justice? And that's why we're prioritizing a lot of education and engagement as a part of our climate plan. The E.H.Zero, we still have a little bit of fundraising to do for that. And then depending on the results of our housing renovation project, a little over a year from now, we expect to go back to commission and provide our recommendations for what we should move forward with. And then we'll need to understand how we implement that and how we fund those recommendations. Renewable energy is something I'm still working on a lot, do a lot of partnership with our utilities and work. And I say partnership, and sometimes, we are partnered together, and sometimes I'm pushing and saying, you're not doing enough, or you need to do this faster, or, so we have that kind of a relationship. It's a very respected relationship, but they know where we stand, and we do a lot of advocacy for not only our city municipal operations, but on behalf of the businesses and the residents, and people who live here, with respect to understanding how it impacts utility bills within your own operations. And so I mentioned some of the others. We talked about the emissions inventory, which is something that hopefully will be announced here within about the next 30 days. Annabelle is leading, and our key staff person, while she's working on the climate plan, to also be working as a key liaison for our community master plan. Thankfully, the feedback that's been received from the community so far on that has been a desire to elevate climate change and environmental justice within that plan. And so that's something we're continuing to be a part of, and collect feedback and better understand what it is that our community is most desiring for the next 20 years for the city of Grand Rapids, and of that, what actually can be implemented through our zoning ordinance. I mentioned the adaptation, some other things I mentioned, refuse. And there's a little bit in terms of a partner, Just Air, who's doing some work on air monitoring. Because that's another kind of state area. It's actually regulated through, of course, the Clean Air or the Clean Air Act. And there was only one air monitoring station in the entire city of Grand Rapids to try to understand whether we're in attainment for different pollutants or not and what's being experienced. But we know that that one monitor is not helping us understand the levels of particulate matter and how they might be dispersed across our community and how that might be affecting some people and their health a lot more than others. And so we've been doing work on that and working with some community groups in terms of truck routes as well. So with that, I am going to take down the slides. And again, please feel free to write some things in the question and answer section. So I'm going to move down and see. All right, so I see, what's the latest update and challenges for the Butterworth property and a solar array? And yes, Jan, always know you're a great advocate and support at the Sierra Club for that. So the Butterworth Landfill, if you're not familiar with it, it's about 160-acre closed Superfund site where the city is the primary owner, but not the only owner. And we, back in 2015, had an RFP and selected a solar developer to actually put solar panels in about a third of that landfill to supply our water resource recovery facility. Well, the company went bankrupt and it fell through. And so since I was hired in late 2017, I have been working nonstop on the Butterworth Landfill solar project, and probably have done a lot of starts and stops in terms of thinking that we had identified avenues that were going to be successful. And then ultimately, because of regulatory reasons or cost reasons, or the fact that what we're able to supply for the city is our street lighting, which requires electricity at night and not during the day, and the prohibitive cost of battery storage at this point in time. So lots of things that we've been looking at. We had also worked with Consumers Energy and the Michigan Public Service Commission approved in their voluntary green pricing program, what's called an anchored tenant program that would allow the regulated Consumers Energy utility to partner with the city of Grand Rapids, where the city could be the anchor tenant for the site, but essentially where community solar, which would be owned and operated by Consumers Energy, would be located, and folks could, decide whether they wanted to participate and subscribe to that. We were working through trying to do a number of cost estimates, and the IRA came out, and all of these other changes have come out that have changed a lot of the original figures that we were using in our assessments. And so we're trying to go back and kind of finalize and have an understanding of what are the impacts of, now there's a 30% ITC and the other types of incentives that are being offered. I was very hopeful. We had requested, and our US senators and Representative Meyer had supported up to a $20 million earmark for us to do the Butterworth project, but it did not make its way through the federal appropriations process. And so that was going to be $10 million to support a component for the city and $10 million to support a low-income community solar project, which I would really love to see stood up, where we would have to do the capital fundraising to pay for the cost of building the solar, but then essentially could identify low-income households that could be the recipients of the electricity credits that are generated from the solar on the Butterworth landfill. And we calculated that we thought it might be about a $400 savings per year for that. But we're really kind of still at a place where there's some significant fundraising that will need to be done to identify some cash opportunities to help support whether we're going to be able to get solar on the Butterworth landfill. Let's see what else we have. Okay. And then we were among one of the first to sign the US Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement. Does the city continue to track progress toward these goals? So what's interesting is, full transparency, we probably signed on to almost every sign on and be a part of this. And we are a part of the Carbon Disclosure Project, and we're part of the Cities Race to Zero, which is an international one. We're still a part of the, we are still in different things because they align with our goals. And some of them have more specific requirements in terms of things to achieve at certain timelines than others do. It's not been something, quite frankly, that we have felt a lot of pressure in terms of others coming to us and saying, well, where exactly are you on this? And if you haven't done this, then, you know, shame on you, and we're going to give you a red X. So I don't have an exact answer as to where we are in some of those, but I'll go back and check in with Annabelle and with my team. And if we have anything specific that we can share out. I know that we did just complete the carbon disclosure project, and we've been doing that annually for a couple of years now, which is a very intensive reporting platform that we've been using. And they do give you a number of quote unquote badges, I think, or points in terms of what you have achieved with respect to the goals. And, you know, right now we're not doing great, but we've recognized that probably after this year, with our climate plan and with our municipal goal and with a lot of the things that we're putting in place, those are the things that we've kind of been docked for up until now because we haven't had those in place. That we should see some good improvement in terms of, you know, how we're ranking against others, at least with respect to the CDP platform that we're in. Okay. I don't see any other questions in the question box, but go ahead and feel free to write them. I'm scrolling through the chats as well, just to see if a question accidentally got in there, but I don't see one. All right. Well, I do have here, oh, I also want to put, I will send this out. Oh, I'm not showing my slides anymore, but let me 1 second here. Let me go back to just share this really quickly. May have taken it out. Oh, no, but I wanted to make sure that people had a good understanding of who on our sustainability team is really the primary lead for different work that I had the opportunity and privilege to talk about today, but it very much is team work, and my team is awesome and I'm so grateful for them. So just to kind of help everybody organize, and if you have questions, you may have been familiar. I previously had an employee, Joao Oliveira, who was amazing, but he had a fantastic opportunity to move to New Mexico and work for a federal energy lab down there and is doing awesome work. So he was really leading on kind of the TBD column that you see here. And I'm hopeful that in the future, I might be able to get out an announcement for bringing on a consultant to help with some of those. But he was really a key lead in doing some solar assessments on our different properties, as well as really helping to collaborate with all of our departments to establish specific goals for our water department or our fire department or different departments with respect to emissions, both from the buildings and the fleet. So I just wanted to take a minute to make sure that I showed you, and this is at the back of the presentation that I'll share as well. Well, Kayla, I don't see any other questions that have come in, but I did provide my email address, and I will get these slides over to you, Kayla, so that you can share them with the participants. And
Awesome.
I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Allison. Yeah, these slides will be shared in a follow-up email as well as the recording of the webinar. So stay tuned for that. Again, thank you, Allison, for being with us today and sharing your knowledge and wisdom and the complexities at the city, as well as, talking about how climate change and climate justice inform decision making. So stay tuned again for future webinars. We'll be putting those out soon. Hopefully we'll do one on that greenhouse gas inventory when that's ready as well. So I hope everyone has a good day. I think we're all set.
Everyone. Hey, I can't remember. Do you guys do post-event surveys?
We have in the past. I don't know if we have one attached to this, but we could look into doing that.
Okay. I just wanted to check to see if that was one.
Cool. All righty. Thank you.